Hey everybody, welcome to another video on the channel, and in today's video I want to talk about the Nightmare Dungeon Challenge Mode and why Challenge Mode in general is not worth it in Wizard101. Now, I haven't done every Challenge Mode. I've done maybe about half of them in the game. Obviously, I do PvP, I do a lot of raiding as well, so I'm no stranger to advanced content. I want to talk about how the players are feeling both from the perspective of the gear from the Nightmare and also how they kind of feel in terms of the challenge mode and the PvE mode not being released in this video. First of all, the gear you get from the dungeon, which is basically the Reaver hat, is essentially the Aeon hat for 170, and the upgrade is very, very marginal. So players don't really have the urge to try and even get into the challenge mode and do the dungeon because the gear is not desirable. It's not worth going for because the upgrade isn't there. Combine this with the fact of the matter, the PvE damage cap is incredibly low right now. It went from 280 down to like 240 or 235 with the soft cap. Players just aren't really happy with it, and they don't have a reason to actually go and do the raid for 170 gear or do the Nightmare to get the 170 gear. So that's the first problem we have here. The second problem is the fact that, well, challenge mode came out before PvE standard mode. Now, I don't think this was a bad thing for KingsIsle to test. I think this was bad for the game, though. You know what I mean? I think them doing this first is going to tell them a lot of information about the game and see how many PvE casual players will actually, you know, get into advanced mode if, well, I guess it's shoved down their throats. I know that sounds really sad, but, you know, it's KI. The Nightmare has been out for, I think, maybe a week now, and so I assume they kind of have a lot of testing and data to work with. Personally, what I've seen is really only the highest level of players can actually beat this dungeon. I think I've only met one group personally that isn't, like, you know, associated with a content creator or something like that that has actually beaten this dungeon. I'm sure there are a couple others who obviously are just, you know, more casual players that don't have help from streamers that have beaten it in the community as well. But generally, like, team up and stuff like that is just never gonna work because all 4 players need to be extremely competent and understand how advanced combat works. And unfortunately, players don't really know much about it, especially the casuals, which is like 95% of the game, I think KingsIsle has said. They don't really understand a lot of advanced in the rule set there, right? Like, there's no enchants, there's no, you know, TC Owl or something like that, for example, right? So a lot of players might go in there with their normal PvE deck and be like, I don't have any cards, and I'm just gonna fall over and die, you know? So in my opinion, if KI had a way to introduce the PvE, like the majority of the audience, to advanced mode in a more formal way, via like a spell quest from Diego, explaining Rochambeau, and like, you know, how this is banned and that is banned in this mode, I think that would help them out a lot, you know? But unfortunately, the PvE players, the majority of the audience, was just kind of thrown in there, and they're just kind of helpless, you know? I hate to say it, but that's kind of what KI did this time around with Wallaroo and the Nightmare Dungeon. Now, I've beaten that dungeon a handful of times, and I obviously have, you know, the gear for my balance, some of my death, and my storm. So when you have a group of 4 competent players who understand what is going on, the problem is, right, that is a very, very hard to come by, right? Especially when the population is like 5% of the game actually understands what the hell is going on in that dungeon, right, guys? So it can be very, very difficult as a PvE player who might not have a lot of friends, or like, you know, nerdy friends, I guess, you know, you could call us the 5% players. You know, they'll have a hard time beating this dungeon, and a lot of them just say they want to wait until the standard mode comes out, and this is a very, very common thing I've heard in the community. I can't beat it, I'm gonna wait until standard mode comes out, or it's not worth my time, I'm gonna wait until standard mode comes out. And that's a fair point, guys. However, we don't know how difficult standard's gonna be, right? Is it gonna keep a lot of the difficulty from challenge, you know? How similar are the drop rates going to be? And that's kind of my next segue into this point here, is Cam, who is actually a designer for the game that, like, pretty much, you know, in a way, it chooses like how many drops you get per fight, you know, for the Nightmare. Here's basically saying on his stream that they might lower the drop rates in the PvE standard casual mode to make the ones in challenge mode actually look better. Now, I think this is a very, very bad thing if they choose to do this, in my opinion. I think if you are the top percentile of the player, you should be able to get your gear way, way faster. I'm not just talking like marginally faster, like they have it with their combat model or whatever, you know? Because you have to put way more effort and way more time into actually completing challenge mode. So I think you should get rewarded more for your efforts. Now, when you actually win this thing on challenge, you do get a lot of jewels, like a lot of jewels, okay? A lot of spellments as well, which is very nice. But I think you only get one piece of Reaver gear and 2 pieces of Warper gear. So you get maybe 1 piece per run, essentially is what I'm saying. And I would like to see that be bumped up to at least 2 pieces per run. I'm not really sure if they could do that for challenge mode or not. Also, the chest is really expensive. It's like 400 crowns by default and doubles every time. Kind of like the raid one, you know, in the Azteca raid. But yeah, another complaint I've heard from the community is the fact of the matter that challenge mode is just too stressful. It's not worth the effort. It's not worth the time. It's not worth all the preparation, right? You get in there, you do all this, you put in your days, your hours with the same group, and then, oh, I just get 1 piece of Reaver gear, you know? It's kind of sounds a lot like the raid. So I think KI could obviously either just make the drops, well, drop more, the actual good Reaver gear, or I guess they could just nerf it down, like the Wisps or the Voids, for example. They're very, very buggy, especially when you combine latency in there, right? I'm Canadian, so I have more latency than people in America. So for me, I'll be 10 feet away and I'll still get hit by a Void. Now, obviously, I've still won the thing, you know, regardless of that happening. But my point is, it's very, very hard for players. So they can nerf down the dungeon a bit in challenge mode to make it easier to, you know, consistently get that 1 piece of gear, or they could just buff the drop rate of the pieces of good gear in the dungeon. Challenge mode and the rest of Wallaroo, in my opinion, is just simply not worth it. Like, on paper, numerically, it just does not add up in my head or a lot of other players' head to be worth doing. You would just rather almost always do standard mode, at least in the normal version of Wallaroo. Again, we don't know what the Nightmare Dungeon is going to look like. A lot of people are saying it's going to be a lot different from Wallaroo. They're going to try something completely different. Like I said, Cam said he might just, you know, really nerf the drop rates in standard to make, you know, challenge look better, which again, I really hope that's not the case. Personally, I think that's just kind of, I don't want to say lazy, but I really don't like it, you know. And I do think it's cool we gave the PvE players a way to get into advanced combat and, you know, PvP and stuff like that. Although I know some of them might not like it. I see comments all the time, like separate PvE, PvP, stop putting PvP and PvE, you know, and that's kind of what they did this update. They basically put PvP in PvE, and you had to do it as a PvE player. So that was a thing. I know one time I did do a random team up on stream, and it was really, really, really bad, and I'm probably never going to do that again. Maybe I could do it for a video, like winning with randoms on the Nightmare Challenge mode. That could be cool. But yeah, that's really everything I think I need to say for the video, guys. I just think, you know, people are kind of overhyping how good standard mode is going to be for them. And I think challenge mode simply is just not worth, again, the time to effort ratio. So I really hope KI can either buff the drop rates in challenge mode for the Reaver, the actually good gear, or they can actually make it a little bit more easier in challenge mode and more reasonable with, I don't know, the maze or the voids or whatever. Just make some part about it a bit easier. The last fight with the mantle stun bullshit, just make some of it more reasonable and more consistent, so the players can feel better about doing the dungeon and getting that loot at a better rate. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts and feedback down there in the comments below, and I will see you guys on the next one. Thank you for watching. Take care.